Gym Wits.
All right, we're gonna have to hope that people get their acts together. But in the meantime, we've got an Ask the Trainer. So Justin, why don't you share the Ask the Trainer question?
Okay, so this question comes from Nick. And Nick, thank you for writing in. And Nick writes, I've been bodybuilding for about 8 years now. Currently, I'm 5'10, 190 pounds, and about 12% body fat. I found that over the last year or so that my strength has continued to steadily increase, but I'm not getting bigger. Can you explain why it is that I'm getting stronger but not bigger? What can I do? Thanks for such an informative podcast.
Very cool.
Once
So
again, Nick, thank you for writing in.
it's a great question. And there's a lot to unpack. So I'll try to keep it as simple and brief as I can. So when it comes to increases in strength, if you just think about, okay, why am I lifting a heavier weight this week than I did last week? There are a few things to consider. So one is the actual like size of the muscle, right? Like the kind of cross-sectional area of the muscle, like that's going to increase. And so when that increases, that will help you increase strength. Another thing that will help is skill. So as you become more skilled at the move, you're going to increase the weights that you're doing. So you want to consider that too. That's where technique and form are really, really important. And as you increase your form as your form gets better, you're generally going to increase your strength. So those are two areas. Another is a kind of neuromuscular system adaptation. So that is connected with skill. So basically as you're learning and developing a movement, your brain is kind of firing. Your brain and body are kind of trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? You're firing these impulses and figuring out, what's the proper, sequence of firing of the muscles in order to produce this movement. And so as you do it more and more frequently, your body becomes more and more efficient at doing it. So you're kind of using less energy is spent on figuring out how to do the movement. And then that neuromuscular kind of adaptation will then help you develop the skill and help you do the movement more efficiently. And then you're wasting less time. Less time is wasted figuring out the movement, and more is spent actually producing the movement. So that's going to help. You also have things like focus and kind of motivation. So that's also going to help a little bit more. So that's where like world records are generally broken in competition because the person's much more focused, much more motivated. So that's going to play into it a little bit. And then you have things like kind of muscle excitation levels, which is related to what we were talking about before, joint stiffening, tendon, ligament adaptation. So these are all things that are kind of happening at the same time. So those are all the for the most part the components of what's helping you to increase the weight that you're lifting from time to time. Now, generally, the two most important are going to be the muscle size and the skill. That as you get better at those two, that's where the most of the strength gains are going to happen. So, when it comes to when we're talking about training, there's hypertrophy training, which is when you're thinking about actually getting bigger. So that's what bodybuilders are really focused on. So bodybuilders are doing, their focus is building muscle and then losing body fat, especially as they're getting closer to like a competition. Where like strength athletes, their focus is force production. How much force can I produce to move this weight, in whatever direction I need to move it. So there are different goals. There's a lot of overlap, right? Because again, since your muscle size is a huge factor in muscle strength, you're going to want to get bigger if you want to get stronger. But there, it's not kind of a one-to-one thing. So you are going to have situations where you're going to have these strength gains that aren't necessarily accompanied by gains in size. So when the focus is on strength, you're generally focused on much heavier weights, and you're focused on the technique, and they tend to be more movement based. So it involves a lot of different muscles to produce the movement. You're not just doing like an isolated move, like a bicep curl or like a leg extension. So, when you're doing that, so for strength training, it's much less weight and it's more focused on how much force can I generate? Can I, so it's perfecting the technique, it's force generation, and it's lower reps, higher weight. When you're dealing with building the size of the muscle, in that case, it's a lot more about muscle fatigue. So we're more focused if we're trying to build muscle to get bigger, we're really focused on fatiguing the muscle. So that tends to be a lot more repetitions. And you can build muscle doing really high reps, like 15, 20 reps, or you could do it at a lower rep range, like 8 to 10. Once you get below kind of a 6 rep range, it tends to be a little bit harder to build muscle. You tend to get a little bit closer to that strength level. But generally, when you're looking at getting bigger, you're trying to, again, fatigue the muscle and create this kind of hormonal adaptation, which kind of helps with or kind of adaptive. You release hormones that help with this kind of response that allows you to grow. So, and again, also with hypertrophy training or bodybuilding training, while there are bigger movements, you're also isolating muscles as well, because you're focused on specific muscles. So if you need to build, the deltoids, you're going to isolate that area. If you need to build the biceps, you're going to isolate that. So there's a lot more isolation training, where strength training tends to be a lot more kind of, movement based. So specifically for you, Nick, right, was the person who asked the question. So specifically for you, without having a lot of details on your program, I would say a couple mistakes people make is one, doing the same exercises over and over. So what happens is if you do the same movements over and over, like I said, you build skill. And so if you're building the skill, you almost have a harder time, pushing your muscles past fatigue. So you might want to think about changing things up and trying different exercises. That might be something that'll help you as far as building muscle, kind of change things up, and that'll help with the fatigue. But also, if you're lifting heavier weights, you might want to think about lighter weights, a little bit higher reps, pushing yourself to fatigue, and just increasing the overall volume of your workouts. So, you may need to do, let's say if you're doing a chest, I'm just throwing it random, and let's say you're doing 3 exercises for your chest and you're doing 6 reps per exercise. Maybe you need to think about doing, 5 or 6 exercises and pushing up to, 8 to 12 repetitions, per thing. So it's just kind of increase the overall volume, but always kind of pushing yourself to muscular fatigue. And another thing I would say is you might need to start isolating muscles again if the goal is hypertrophy. So that's something for you to think about. Like it may, if you're really into, let's say you're doing a lot of, like, you're doing deadlifts and squats and power cleans, and you're doing things that are more movement based. If you love doing that, you might have to think, is it worth it for me to focus on other moves? You know, if you really enjoy doing those movements. So that's something to just consider. Like, maybe you like the strength training, and maybe it's not worth building the size to forget about the strength training. Or, like I said, maybe you don't care about that. You just want to get bigger. Then, isolate some muscles and just kind of increase your overall volume.
Another thing to think about is your diet, right? Especially
Good
when it
point.
comes to size. And are you taking in enough calories? Because you can't be at a caloric deficit, right?
Yeah.
You need to take in a lot more calories. And of course, with that, always you want good quality food. So you want to make sure you're getting good fat in there, a lot of protein. And of course, as always, make sure that you're sleeping well enough. But what is your diet? Are you getting in a surplus? Do you need is it a surplus of calories?
Yeah.
Or so you need a
Well,
surplus?
I mean, in this case,
What is
the assumption is he's trying to gain. Well, he's trying to get bigger. So the
Yeah.
assumption is he's trying to put on weight. So in that case, yeah, you need to be at a caloric surplus. So you need to take in more calories than you're burning per day. So that's a great point. That if another thing could be that you're lifting heavy and you're getting stronger, but you're just not eating enough to help with the size. So increasing the calories will definitely be something that you might want to look into in order to put on a little bit more size.
Okay.
Cool.
So Nick, thank you for writing in. We hope that helps you in your bodybuilding journey.
Yep. And as usual, if you have any questions, send them to thegymwits@gmail.com. We love to answer your question, and as many as we get in, we'll keep putting these out.
Gym